This is Amalgamations, the Contemporary Jewish Artists Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Klaus. So my guest today is Bracha Bdil, an Israeli composer. Now, we've never met in person, but us coming together today is, I believe, the result of our growingly connected world in the time of COVID-19. A little while ago, figuring that I wouldn't have the opportunity to perform with anyone for a while, I decided to record two pieces by another Israeli composer, Emmanuel Val, his Jewish sonata for unaccompanied trumpet and his Israeli suite for four trumpets, with me playing each part. Check them out on my YouTube channel, Aaron Klaus. That led me to connect with Doron Modan at the Israel Music Center, and we got started talking about this podcast. So she connected me with you, and here we are. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Pleasure.
Now, I know that you came to composition in a unique way. I'd love to hear more about that. Maybe you could take us to the beginning, though. So you grew up and still identify as Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox, and could you take us back to your early musical memories and how those memories shaped you?
I grew up in a very musical house. Actually, my father is a very good tenor, and he's got a synagogue, and he's a kind of a cantor. So one of the sources of my musical influences is the Chazanut world, the cantor world. From Rosenblatt and Kvartin and Kosovitsky and all these names I heard late at night when he ate his supper. And the other influence was the classical music. All day long, the classical hits were sounding at home. And the third influence was the folk music or pop music that I played on my keyboard. And from there I really got to know all the ragtime and all the folk, all the polkas and the waltzes and all kind of soft music. One most very great influence is the Hasidic pop music, which was also heard at home a lot.
As you got older, how did you continue to engage more deeply with music?
My mother sent me and all the other children to learn keyboard. Whoever practiced, the music lesson continued. That's why I actually practiced a lot. I loved it, and I played the organ for 7 years and parallel the accordion for 4 years. Then I moved to the piano. And then I went to music stream, and then I understood I want to make this as a profession. And I went and did my first degree in music education, and then my second one. And then I discovered that there is a composition faculty at the academy. Until then, I didn't know there is something existing. I saw myself only at the performing part. I didn't know I could really write music. I did improvise a lot, but I didn't know it could be written, that I can do the same thing that Mozart and Beethoven did. So that came very late, actually, at 20 years old.
Could you talk more about what you found so compelling about being able to compose?
I did play many songs by ear, and the improvising I discovered at 12 or 13 years old, which improvising that wasn't a song, that was new music, that my fingers led to that music. I remember this moment, and I felt the tears in my eyes on that moment when I made my music in improvising, but I didn't dream of writing it down. But that was the first moment when I knew that that you can learn it, that you can really write it and give other people to perform it.
So I want to dig a little deeper. I want to help myself and maybe our listeners understand more about you and about perceptions of the Haredi community. Is it unique in your experience that you were exposed to so much different kinds of music growing up, given your ultra-Orthodox background?
It is unique. Most of the ultra-Orthodox listen to Hasidic pop music and to nigunim, but my parents came from Britain and the classical music was very dominant. To send the children to learn music, to learn dance, to learn art was part of our education. I think this is a European way of thinking, or not Israeli, maybe. But anyway, I think also in the public world, the amount of people who are into classical music are less than the pop music.
Of course.
The same statistic can be also in the ultra-Orthodox community.
I hope you don't mind me asking. I really appreciate it. All of the people I've interviewed so far have a few things in common that are not true for you. Number one, they're American. And number two, they identify with a non-Orthodox sect of Judaism. I think that inherent in those realities is that their identity forming processes are shaped by the interaction of Judaism with non-Jewish elements of their lives. Is that the case for you too? And why or why not?
For me, to be Jewish and live in Israel is connected. I don't see any separation. I live my life in the Jewish world. I practice Judaism and I live here in Israel, and I make my choices in music as well. And I live with all of this as a whole.
So let's talk about some of your compositions. I figure there's no better place to start than with Bereshit, with Genesis. Genesis offers a world of vivid oral imagery. Each movement takes the listener through one of the days of creation, where one "and God said it was good" leitmotif ties each day together, except, of course, on day 2, where that was not said. Now, your music uses various orchestrative effects and the colors of each instrument to achieve these vivid images. Take the second movement, for example. So we have the flight of the birds in the woodwinds. We have the sky represented by the high string pedal point, and the sea represented by the low instruments in these waves. You're listening to the second movement of Genesis as performed by the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Dmitry Yablonsky. How do you come to your orchestrational decisions? And so how do you make your music so evocative?
When I compose, I do need a non-musical thinking in the music. That's why the Genesis story, apart from being such a dominant part in my way of life and beliefs, it's also a great non-musical and very colorful story to compose about. So if I dream about the sky and the birds and the horn, the shofar creating the world, I just need to put the colors of the orchestra and it comes to be music.
The next two pieces of yours I'd like to talk about, Hayom and Yizkerem, are both dedicated to Alexander Tamir. Could you tell me more about him and why he is so important in your life?
I met him at the Jerusalem Academy in the piano four hands and two piano course. For many years he gave at the academy. I understood he was a Holocaust survivor and he had no children. And one of my first composition I wrote was for his course, Modal Suite for piano four hands. And from then on, he helped me in the performing parts of my compositions. And when I heard his story, I was very touched, and the way the Nazis murdered his father, and all what he went through, the Holocaust. So I wrote about it few works, and they were all dedicated to him.
Can you share his story about his father?
From the Vilna ghetto, they got to the Estonia concentration camp, and his father was a very big doctor in Vilna. Actually, his father wrote the words of the Ponal, Stiller, Stiller, the first stanza, and Alexander was Alec, 11 years old, composed this song, and it won in the composition competition in the ghetto. They knew what's happening. They knew that 70,000 Jews were murdered in Ponal gradually. Well, after they got to the Estonia concentration camp, the Nazis took all the doctors and all the people who knew too much what's going on to be shot outside the camp. And when he was on the track, his father, he shouted to his Alec, "Remember me." And then the track went. When it came back, it was empty, but it was written with a finger dipped in blood. "They are killing us. Take revenge." Actually, Alexander Tamir didn't speak about the Holocaust until he was 70 years old. Family and people he talked to, he understood it's too difficult for them to hear what he went through. So he just cut his life and began life of a big pianist with a very impressive career. Until 70 years old, he understood for the sake of his father, for remembering his father. And from then on, he talked about the Holocaust in many interviews. And also to me, he told, and I wrote a few works. He came to the performances and he was very touched.
Wow, what a story. Thank you for sharing. Now, the text for Hayom comes from the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, and it says, "This day you cause all the creatures of the earth to stand in judgment. Have mercy upon us. You are tremendous and holy." Why does this text in particular resonate with you?
Well, this is a day of judgment. And this composition was sent to a composition competition in Germany, which was on the name of Wolf Domashkin. Wolf Domashkin was a young composer and conductor in the Vilna ghetto, where Alex was a young child as 11 years old. And he led the composition competition in the ghetto, which the Song of Punau won there. So it was actually a kind of a closure when this work of Hayom won in the competition, which was on his name.
There are a lot of themes to unpack in this short text, right? The idea of judgment, the idea of revenge, the idea of memory, the idea of mercy. So is this piece about judgment, revenge, memory, mercy?
I can say yes. All these emotions are in this composition, and you can hear the horn blasting like the shofar in Rosh Hashanah in that day of judgment, which we believe that God is judging all people.
I think it speaks to the real challenge emotionally of grappling with this immense trauma that our people have faced. And so I think it's important that you are expressing this in your music. I think many have almost questioned the idea of God, questioned, right? How can there be a God in such awful things? But I love that you are bringing it back to this idea of Rosh Hashanah, rather than running away from the idea or believing less in God or in the mitzvot or whatever you identify with, that you run towards it and you think about the idea of a God who is merciful, a God who passes judgment. So I really love that. As you'll hear in this clip from Hayom, the baritone and horn evoke a sense of awe and trembling. It ends with the horn blasts that connote the blowing of the shofar, symbolizing the day that humans were created and to be judged for their acts. Take a listen. You've been listening to Hayom as performed by baritone Stefan Zecik and hornist Katerina Popovich. Let's talk about Yiz Kerem, which is also dedicated to Alexander Tamir. In this piece, which is for a cappella choir, you lift up the notion of death in God's name and the idea of vengefulness from our liturgy. It includes text from Av HaRachamim, Avinu Malkeinu, El Malei Rachamim. And I'd like to read the text, actually, from your piece, if that's okay. May he redress the spilled blood of his servants. O nations, make his people rejoice, for he will redress the blood of his servants. He will retaliate against his foes and appease his land and his people. He who exacts retribution for spilled blood remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the humble. Our Father, our King, do this for the sake of those who were slain for thy holy name. Do this for the sake of those who were slaughtered for thy unity. Do this for the sake of those who went through fire and water for the holiness of thy name. He will execute judgment among the corpse-filled nations. He will crush the rulers of the many lands. God, full of mercy, judge of widows and father of orphans, provide a sure rest upon the wings of the divine presence for all the souls who were murdered, slaughtered, burned, strangled, buried alive, who died in all manners of unseemly deaths and went to heaven for thy sanctification. The everlasting one is their heritage. The Garden of Eden shall be their resting place. Amen. Yikadal v'yikadash Rabba, glorified, sanctified. May our Lord remember them. Yizkerem. Haunting, chilling text. The result in your music is haunting, dark, and full of despair. You're listening to Yizkerem as performed by the Moran Singers Ensemble with soprano Shira Miriam Cohen and tenor Michael Bachner, conducted by Guy Peltz. As I said before, I think that one of the biggest challenges in dealing with the Holocaust for us nowadays is figuring out what emotions to feel. Should we feel sadness or anger, frustration? I wonder for you, what is Yizkerem trying to express? How do we, or how should we, grapple with this immense collective trauma that we continue to experience?
It's not an easy question. I see my part just as remembering. And if I can add to this in my way, the remembrance, so I'll do it.
Yeah, thank you. Now, before the piece is to be played, you ask to be read the words of Gideon Hausner, who was the chief prosecutor at the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961 in Israel, who, of course, was the main executor of the Nazi policy. So his words were, "Where I stand before you, I do not stand alone. With me here at this time, 6 million accusers. But they cannot rise to point an accusing finger at the glass booth and shout at the one sitting there, I blame. The ashes piled high on the hills of Auschwitz and were scattered in the fields of Treblinka have been washed away by the rivers of Poland and the graves scattered across the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voice is not heard. Therefore, I am here and speak on their behalf of this terrible indictment.
For the souls who were murdered, slaughtered, burned, strangled, buried alive, who died in all manners of unseemly deaths, and which to heaven for thy everlasting one.
I personally struggle with the idea of a vengeful God because you want to think that God is all merciful, but those are our texts. And we have this immense tragedy. And as much as I struggle, I think for a lot of people today, we run away from struggle. And I think it's very important to run towards it and to really embrace it. You can't erase the memory of these horrible things. And so I thank you for offering this piece of art to me, to the world. I want to shift gears and talk about two of your compositions that aren't about the Holocaust, but rather about your identity as someone who lives in the Mediterranean region of the world, Oasis and Mediterranean Suite. Now, Oasis is a duet for clarinet and piano based on different maqamat. Can you explain to our listeners what a maqam is?
Maqam is the Arabic modes, Arabic scales.
And how is it different from Western modes or Greek modes that we know, Dorian, Aeolian, and so on?
Because of the quarter tones that are mixed in, and also the mood of the mode. There is a scale for the morning, and a scale for the evening, and a scale for going out to a war. For them, it's much more than just a scale.
So I'm listening to Oasis with a Western ear. Can you help me understand the structure of this piece?
My work begins with the improvisation mood, and then it leads to a metric section in 7/8, which is exotic for me as a classical composer, and again leads to a meditative part like the desert, and full of improvisation again, and then comes to an end.
You've been listening to Oasis as performed by clarinetist Tal Gottdiener and pianist Naor Shani. Now, Mediterranean Suite is for solo piano and also uses non-Western modes and rhythmic patterns, although, of course, being for the piano, you're somewhat limited in your use of the 12 notes that are each a half step apart instead of a quarter step. Here's an excerpt from the last movement. You've been listening to Mediterranean Suite as performed by pianist Mohammed Al-Sheikh. So there's the Bracha Bdil that is artistically grappling with the Holocaust, and there's the Bracha Bdil who writes music on biblical themes, and there's the Bracha Bdil who is of the Middle East and has this influence from Arabic music. Who are these different parts of you? How does the specifically Israeli aspect of your identity influence who you are? And how do these other parts of you influence who you are?
I'm not sure yet I can answer on that question. I like to try different things and to know new things.
Lest the listener think that you are solely a Jewish composer, there are many of your works that are not Jewish at all. So my question is this: who are you? What is your identity?
As I said at the beginning, there are many influences on me. Classical, Jewish, folk. Everything merged into one personality, into one music personality, which is me.
I love that answer, because what I'm finding in talking with you and different people and reflecting on myself is that that's something that we all share. We can't separate out any part of who we are. And that, for us, whether we're creating music or whatever art we're creating, is so fundamental to who we are in this world and to who we are as people. And I think it's really beautiful, the idea that it's these different parts of us coming together and that you can hear that. And I can certainly see that in your music. And that's why I love listening to it and diving deep into that. If you'd like to learn more about Bracha Bdil and listen to more of her music, check out her website at brachabdil.blogspot.com. That's BRACHABDIL.blogspot.com. Thanks so much for listening. Our theme song is F Minor Klezmer by the Orchestra from their album Fancy Cocktails and Hot Sauce. Check them out at the_orchestra.com. That's orchestra with a K, ORKESTRA. I'm your host, Aaron Klaus, and this has been Amalgamations, the Contemporary Jewish Artists Podcast.